All right, good evening. We made a counteroffer to the governor. I think he's going to say that it wasn't enough, it wasn't right. He's wondering why we don't want to agree to the 2% provider tax or sick tax or any of the transportation money. He's going to say that he wants that on the table. It's never been on the table for us. We don't want to put it on the table. And one of the things I want to talk about is right here we have $491 million that automatically moved to the budget reserve in the November forecast, and so that's something that we presented this time around, that we want to consider using that, and so we made an offer to cover the deputy registrars in there. That was $13 million, and then broadband, which is $30 million. We said let's cover it out of our reserves because we put a large number in the reserves, and we have the largest budget reserves that we've ever had. And so we feel like we can use some of that because of the fact that the omnibus bill last year didn't get done, and there was a lot of unfinished business from last year that we feel like should be covered in there. And so that was our counteroffer today, or I should say just now. But the other thing we said to the governor is we made an offer of $100 million in the general fund, increasing two things. E12, we increased $75 million, and public safety and judiciary, we increased $25 million. There was no counteroffer back on those general fund budgets. Those are the 10 budgets that we have to get done, and that's where we're asking for some movement. So that's where we're at right now. It doesn't feel like we're in a good spot, but we're going to keep pushing through.
Are you going back later, sir?
I believe so. We're going to have dinner. They're going to talk with their group about whether they want to. We're suggesting that we do. There's a lot of hard work that has yet to be done.
Senator, you dip into these reserve accounts. Don't you make it worth your while to get more than $43 million?
We're simply showing that this is an area that we should consider. There's a number of things that we would consider there, but because they didn't make a significant counteroffer back to us in the general fund, we just left the door open that that's an area we should consider.
Senator, there is such a wide disparity in the proposals. A lot of these offers seem like they're just nibbling around the edges, and the big elephant in the room is the gas tax and the healthcare provider tax. When is there going to be major movement there?
Well, that's our point, is we already have large resources that we can use. We have $1 billion of surplus. The latest numbers in April came out, $489 million new money that we're not even counting. We're above forecasted total of $473 million, and we have $2.5 billion in the reserves, of which 491 came in November because of the bills that were vetoed by the governor, at least as part of it. So we're simply saying we have resources. In addition to that, we had another $2.2 billion that our government grew, the forecast number. And so we're saying let's live within resources that we have. That's 5%, but we've already moved up from there. And so we're saying we don't need taxes to do it, and the governor is. And that's why it's such a difficult place that we're at. I'm suggesting that we all focus on the 10 budget spending targets. Let's see where those are, and let's see what a budget looks like so we know how to get to the finish line.
Mr. Leader, can you see the budget surplus, or not the budget surplus, the reserve rather, being substantially reduced to take care of this problem? Would your caucus advocate doing a substantial reduction of that in order to maybe to try to get close to the
No, I would say we're open to some budget reserves, and that's why I point to the fact that $491 million went in November. So that's kind of why I say that. Plus, in addition, if this number continues to grow, come next November, there's another grab that goes into the reserves. And so that's why we're saying we're at a place that some of that reserve shouldn't have been in there if we'd passed that omnibus bill last year. Broadband was in there, safe schools, a number of other things, and we're saying we should be open to that.
Senator Zogby, your language on the gas tax has been slightly different than your language on that 2% medical provider tax. You've been saying no line in the sand when it comes to the gas tax. Where are you on the 2% medical provider tax? You said that you were to talk to people and clinics in your area and your district. Where are you on that?
Yeah, so we're listening to all people. We want to get the 10 budgets put together so we know exactly where we're at. We don't know where the governor and House will agree to with us for spending targets in each of the 10 areas. That will give us a clear picture of what the overall budget looks like. Right now we're worlds apart, but we have to work together to get to a place in the middle.
Mr. Leader, a week later, you will have a self-imposed deadline on these targets, and now here we are in front of a billboard with emojis on it. What's this like for you?
So what I would say is, I don't know how many times in a row now that we haven't reached targets till Friday, Saturday, Monday of the end of session. We're all aiming for tomorrow night or Wednesday morning. That allows us to get done in time. And so I'm not giving up on that. That's, I think the governor and the speaker also want to do that. It'd be nice if we actually finished on time. That should be our goal. We have to have the spending targets first, and then we see how everything fits together. All right, thank you.
You doing a late night tonight?
I hope so.
Well, the conversation has moved in a very disappointing direction. We thought that we were negotiating in good faith. We moved nearly $1 billion toward their position, and they've just moved more than $1 billion away from us. Our red lines are: we are not going to cut health care for elderly Minnesotans. We are not going to cut health care for people with disabilities in Minnesota. We are not going to force all of the school districts in the state of Minnesota to lay off teachers or drive up local property taxes. Those are our red lines, and those are the things that Minnesotans asked us to ensure and protect when we came here to do work for them. You know, in Washington, D.C., you can run a deficit. You can budget completely irresponsibly, and you can do this Trump tax cuts for corporations and super rich people and never have to pay the piper. But here in the state of Minnesota, we have to balance our budget. So the Republicans have already put on the table spending the reserve and not balancing the budget into the future. This is a Trump style of budgeting that is not allowable under Minnesota state law. It doesn't work for Minnesotans and would really rob Minnesotans of the investments in public services that they depend on.
I would also add that Senate Republicans are dramatically overplaying their hand. After the last election, Republicans in state government in Minnesota have one small foothold of any influence whatsoever, and it is 3 Senate Republicans. That's it. If they think that they are going to write the entire budget for the state of Minnesota, that a newly elected governor and a newly elected speaker and House majority are going to capitulate and fall on our face entirely in front of them just because they don't want to do anything or they want to spend in deficit, they are sadly mistaken and badly misunderstand their political position.
You know, Minnesotans know what compromise looks like, and no is not compromise.
Do you think this is working?
You know, we thought that there was some movement and there was a seriousness about negotiations today, but instead of going up and putting a serious offer on the table, they went and played with emojis and created a big poster board for you all to look at. So that tells us a lot about how serious Senate Republicans are about negotiating a deal that's in the best interest of Minnesota. When you're thinking more about what your emojis look like on poster board than the fiscal stability of the state of Minnesota for the next 4 years, I don't think you're serious about negotiations.
Is it worthwhile to come back tonight and negotiate further?
It's hard to imagine that there's a lot to talk about given that they've already spent more time on their PR today than coming up with a serious offer. One wonders what they're cooking up right now for their next press conference.
Is it your turn to make another offer or their turn?
I think we need some time to process what their plans are, because clearly they're invested in a public relations battle and not a serious conversation about resolving the budget for the state of Minnesota.
And just to be clear, their offer specifically says that they don't care if there is a deficit in the next biennium, and they also are taking money out of the reserves. This is politicians taking money that they don't need in order to cover up their own political cowardice. And so we cannot weaken Minnesota's budget position in the long run because they lack the courage to actually either raise the revenue needed to fund the services they claim they want or dramatically cut services to people in the state of Minnesota. That's their choice to make, but using our reserves and using deficit spending into the future is not a serious offer, it's not serious negotiating, and it's not serious governing.
Destructive Republican budgeting, leaving deficits for Minnesotans and cutting schools, cutting health care, cutting dental care is not what Minnesotans asked for. It is not what we're going to stand for.
Thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome back. I won't hide that I'm disappointed. I truly felt we were making progress. Last time we stood in front of you, we came back and made what we felt was a very strong move, and it was significant in terms of dollar amounts and significant in terms of the platform we ran on and that Minnesotans voted for. And instead of getting a measured response, we got a radical departure from what we've been seeing. And I can't stress that that the taking of the provider tax, the ability to provide health care for over 1 million Minnesotans, 43% of our children, a 27-year, bipartisan, proven program. And now I'm being told at the final hour that it is off the table. This is where a free press will be very helpful, and positive journalism to tell the story, because the following people came up here this last week to tell me that it was absolutely imperative that we kept the provider tax in place. All of these are presidents of CEOs of Minnesota Hospital Association, Tri-County Healthcare, Rock County Hospitals, Pipestone Medical Center, Mercy Hospital, Hennepin Health, St. Mary's Medical Center, Perm Health, Centricare Health, Johnson Memorial, Redwood, Avera Marshall Regional Medical Center, Wyndham Area, Stanford Health, Ridgeview Medical, Fairview, Lakewood, Alina, First Light, Northfield. This is just the folks that came up. There's 141 of them on the list. And I say this because you're going to hear from Commissioner Franz, a significant offer to move in the direction of compromise that Minnesotans want and expect. Not only did we not get even a slight movement our way, we moved the other way. We chose now that we're going to dip into the rainy day funds, and I don't blame them for the money they're trying to spend, because they're going to go home and seriously undermine the health of Minnesotans and our education system. And I have continued to say, give me a chance, give me an offer, try and reach compromise with us and this movement. But I think the thing we remind ourselves all the time, that budget's not just a fiscal document, it's a moral document, and there are real people behind that. And I'd like Lieutenant Governor to just say a couple words about what taking the provider tax off the table actually means.
Well, we've had a roller coaster of an afternoon, and I think when we talk about this, we know that the Healthcare Access Fund pays for really essential programs like Minnesota Care, medical assistance, and there are folks who rely on this program, and I think it's important that we remember when we're talking about the provider tax and the Healthcare Access Fund, who we're talking about. We are talking about 40% of all children in Minnesota, 40%. 2/3 of the folks who are on Medicaid are seniors. And we're talking about people with disabilities. So when Senate Republicans simply say it is off the table, they are saying children, seniors, and people with disability are off the table. We're willing to compromise, but we are not willing to compromise with some of the most vulnerable people in the state of Minnesota. So we know that there's a group of over 155 organizations, and I know it is thrilling journalism when we read those off to you, but there are a couple of folks that I want to just make sure that we mention, and that is the AARP, believe we should continue to support the provider tax and the Healthcare Access Fund, the American Cancer Society, the American Heart Association, Faith in Minnesota, the Joint Religious Legislative Coalition, LifeWorks Services, the Minnesota Catholic Conference, the Minnesota Hospital Association, Sanford Health Plan, UCare, the ARC of Minnesota. So these are folks with incredible credibility, who are working on the front lines in communities every single day, who are advocates for the very people who will be devastated by having the provider tax off the table. And we simply cannot stand for it. It is irresponsible, it is reckless, and it is cruel.
And I'm going to have Commissioner Franz take just a couple minutes to explain to you why they're doing this, why their numbers don't match. And he's going to talk to you, too, about the proposal that they came to me. And I hope everybody's highlighting very, very clearly what they said was only 2 years of balanced budget. He'll tell you the last time they tried to do this, and I think some of you veteran journalists here can guess what year that was, and I bet some of you can even extrapolate what happened to Minnesota's finances after they chose to go down this road. They do not have the capacity to fill the needs that their community is asking for. They've taken rigid pledges of no new taxes, and to try and fix that, they are willing to put health care at risk, our fiscal stability, and dive into our rainy day fund and go to 2-year budgeting that, well, the commissioner will tell you what happened last time. So.
Thank you, Governor. Yeah, my name is Myron France, Commissioner of Minnesota Management and Budget. And as the state's chief financial officer, I can tell you this last offer does not make fiscal sense. Back in 2002 was one of the last times we tried to do this 2-year budgeting process where you, instead of looking out over the 4-year budget horizon, it was based on 2 years. And many of you will recall that whole decade was a decade of deficits. We didn't solve that problem until 2013 when we created more fair revenue system for Minnesota. And since that time, we've been able to have balanced budget after balanced budget. And their proposal would take this back to a 2-year budgeting process and would eliminate the balance of the tails, what we call the tails of 2 years out in the horizon, to make sure that they're balanced. And it would destroy that common sense of fiscal responsibility that we've been operating under. And as the governor mentioned, not only is that a problem, but the fact that they want to use the rainy day fund is really problematic. You may all recall that it's taken us years to restore the rainy day fund now to about $2.5 billion. That fund was set up to allow Minnesota to adjust to an economic downturn. The goal of that fund is to be able to allow us to respond in an economic downturn when revenues start slowing down quickly. We believe that money should be there and it should stay safe and not come out to be used for operating money. When any business uses operating or a budget reserve or their checkbook or their savings account for operating budgets, you're going to get yourself in trouble. So we're really concerned about this. It destroys the fiscal sense of responsibility that we've tried to build into these budgets for the last 8 years. Thank you.
So you see what's happening here. I think we can't lay it out anymore. I think it's really unfortunate. I guess my disappointment is even higher that this response came 30 minutes after I was willing to move pretty dramatically on what I think are needed transportation funding to try and find a reasonable compromise. Commissioner always talks about this, the rainy day fund. I don't think it's raining right now. They tell us how great the economy is and how well things are. Why would we use the state's reserves at a time? And you know the reason is because their funding numbers for the essentials for Minnesota are so grossly underfunded, they know they can't go back home without putting more money into education, more money into corrections, because that's what's needed. And to do that, they dig into that fund. So disappointment, surprised that they would get here. I don't think it is a good faith effort by any stretch of the imagination, and that's where we stand as of right now. So, any questions?
Dr. Walz, when you saw the proposal that the office put on the table, this cardboard with emojis on it, what was the initial thing that ran through your mind?
Well, I think real people, instead of this dance or whatever for elections. We didn't come here for politics. That's a means to an end. The end is good policy, and it's just frustrating to me because we could have we were moving, I think, in the right direction. I still believe that Minnesotans want that, and we have to figure out a way to get them back to the table to give have a serious conversation.
Any reason to keep meeting tonight?
It's a good question. It's hard to see right now. My expectation was, as I think all of us know how negotiations are supposed to work, I kind of thought I might see something come back on transportation or something else. I mean, just think about that. That was something that's been in the works for a couple years. I talked to you, Tom, out at Chamber of Commerce out in the West Metro area 2 years ago about what I thought were the needs for that in crafting this bill, and then to come down on that with an expectation, and then this is it's just beyond what I thought they would come back with. So I'm not sure right now.
Governor, will you? Is this 2% tax or the provider tax? Is that your line in the sound saying yours?
Well, yeah, and I think, and I'm just going to call this out. I heard something very different on your program on Sunday morning that seemed hopeful to me that, okay, this is the way we've been talking about this. This is still in play. I think many of you had extrapolated where a landing pad might be. What do we do with reinsurance or my proposal to do premium assistance and the provider taxes or some way? And now tonight, after we moved, we hear this line in the sand that can't go anywhere. And that in itself, it is so, you heard the names here and what the Lieutenant Governor said, but the just fiscal irresponsibility of it. And again, they're moving to two-year budgeting so they can spend more money and not have to worry about it. This used to be the party of fiscal responsibility. This used to be the party that actually had some credibility to talk to us about how you did budgeting. And they did this. They cannot stand in front of you with a straight face, no matter how many emojis are behind them, and tell you that it is wise to go to two-year budgeting and dive into our rainy day reserve funds so that they can fund programs that we have already funded responsibly and paid for. And so that piece of it is like the linchpin to make it all work. And they have come to you, and again, you have all asked me, rightfully so, and grilled me, where are you willing to compromise? Where are you willing to change? Where are you willing to meet them? And my answer has been I didn't want to negotiate with myself, but I was always willing to make that. You did not hear me talk about red lines because they are irresponsible and don't serve Minnesotans well. They have now, at this hour, this close, put out the biggest of the red lines that how do I come back to them? How do I figure out how to make that work? That's what we're asking ourselves.
One more question. So, Governor, you do not, they treat this like income redistribution. They're saying that this provider tax is passed on all patients, private.
Nobody in healthcare believes that. Have they held a press conference where they had healthcare experts in front of you? Have they had patients who've come up here? Have they had the people, and again, if they want to dismiss the Cancer Society, AARP, Catholic Charities, the Hospital Association, Allina Health, I can go on and on and on, 141 hospital CEOs. They're not hospital CEOs. They are politicians trying to figure out how they can tell Minnesotans that they are fiscally responsible and won't raise their taxes. At the same time, they're ripping health care out from us. So they can call it whatever they want. This is where our democracy demands a fair accountability. Not the governor said this and the Senate said this. This is experts. This is a 27-year program. They kept calling this, in one meeting, one of them said that, Walz's provider tax. Go ahead and call it that. I would be proud of that because it's 27 years of functioning, 27 years of working, and I've had the courage to talk about how are we going to get this there. And I heard them mention last week, they talked about 2011. They called it their victory. Their victory. This is our biggest victory. That was the exact words. Repealing a nearly 30-year provider tax, repealing it 8 years in the future, not looking at the changes to health care over that 8 years and calling that a victory. There is no patient advocates calling for the repeal of the provider tax. So I don't know, in the position that we're in and the responsibility we were given as the governor, lieutenant governor in this administration, our job is first and foremost the protection and the well-being of Minnesotans. And I, from an ethical standpoint, get rid of the politics, get rid of the financial side. From an ethical side of this, I know that the repeal of the provider tax will hurt the most vulnerable amongst us, and they have no plan. Ask them what their plan is to plug in. There is no plan. All they did earlier today was accelerate the use of this by 1 year, and now they've just given up on that and said there's not enough there, we're going to dive into the rainy day funds. So, again, we're here to do the bidding and do the right stuff for Minnesota, but I don't have fair partners to work with right now. So we'll wait and see. We'll back up. We'll see if they'd like to take another look at this, but there's hospitals all across Minnesota that are now hearing this. The one thing I would assure to the seniors, to those with disabilities, to people with children, we'll get this worked out. We will find a place to do this, because when that language is used right here, real people out there get scared. Real people get worried about what's going to happen to them, and real people's lives are negatively impacted, so you can go back up there and have a talking point that you did not raise taxes. They're already raising $850 million in taxes. They're simply redistributing to people who got foreign income coming back to the country, however they do it. They're raising $850 million in tax conformity, but they're going to spend it all on giving tax breaks to somebody. And then they have to figure out how do they make their budget work. So it's irresponsible. I would argue it's why they're holding on to a slim minority in one house in the Senate, and that Minnesotans expected us to come here, act decent, compromise for solutions, and get the work done without the drama. So we'll be back at it.
Thanks, everybody.